Hi everybody, getting started in a minute. It's 12 o'clock, almost time for our Comp 1720 6720 lecture. I'm just waiting for the stragglers to come in. I can see some of the numbers ticking up online, a few people watching today, which is great. It's surreal watching lectures on Twitch. It's surreal giving lectures on Twitch. But then again, I've been doing this for the last year now, or starting in March last year. So it's the way things work for me now. It's giving lectures over Twitch. Give people a few more minutes before jumping in. Make sure I've got the correct tab up so I can see what's going on in the chats. Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Lecture 2 for Comp 1720 and Comp 6720. Should be big, yeah, that's working. Seems like my stream hasn't quite caught up with the loop back yet. I'm just trying to make sure that I actually look the way that I think I look. I think I probably do. Oh, there I am. Woo! I still don't have the perfect image in my stream. It's really tricky to control the lighting in this room with the sun coming in, but we might have different lighting situations as the semester goes along. Okay. Now, I hope that we do have good success today with Microsoft Stream, as well as Twitch and YouTube. I was really happy to see so many of you folks joining me live for the video on Monday. I know we had issues with Microsoft Stream. I thought it was my fault, but then some of my colleagues who are also using Microsoft Stream for live lectures had the same problem. So maybe it's not my fault, actually. So we'll work to find a solution, but obviously it's frustrating when things don't work the way that you want them to. Welcome to today's Comp 1720 6720 lecture. The plan for this course is that on Mondays, I'll give a lecture that basically is about the code or technical topics, and on Thursdays I'll give a shorter lecture which is mainly focused on the more theoretical side of the course, maybe some more artistic inspiration and ways for framing your creative outputs in this course. Because as we discussed on Monday, all of the assessments for this course are really authentic making art creation activities. So a good goal for this course is for you not just to develop the coding skills to attempt those exercises and create interesting software artifacts, but also to create something which is a work of art. So in today's lecture, we'll discuss this concept a little bit. What is art? Which is a fairly big concept to try to attack in one lecture, but we'll see how we go. What is art? It's a question which in some sense I'm not very qualified to answer, because by some sort of calculations, I'm not an artist, I'm a musician. So I could probably talk more about what is music, and we'll probably have a lecture on that later on in the course. But at this stage, the notes that I have, or the way I'm going to attack this question, will be sort of, I guess, from the computer science side as well as musician side. So perhaps if you're a visual artist in the audience and you think, well, he's saying something that's completely ridiculous, feel free to jump in the chat and tell me, and I'm happy to integrate your experience as well. If there are any art historians or philosophers out there who have other ideas, I'm interested to hear from you as well. But what is art, from my perspective anyway? Well, when we think about art, you think about an example of a piece of art. I guess most of us would start thinking about a painting, right? That's sort of the archetypal concept of what art is. And, well, this is the second part of this lecture is not just what is art, but how can we make it in P5? Because you need to make art. So when I think about the archetype for what art is, I guess I think about a painting that would be on display in a gallery. And here's an example of a painting called Not Titled Landscape. This is a piece by an Australian Indigenous artist called Albert Namatjira, painted in 1955. Albert Namatjira is probably Australia's most famous Aboriginal artist, or our most famous Aboriginal artist who worked within a Western style. And he had quite an interesting story, which is fascinating and sort of tragic, considering the way Aboriginal people in Australia were treated within Albert Namatjira's lifetime. Australian Aboriginal people weren't citizens of Australia. They were sort of defined as a lesser kind of person, and Albert Namatjira was the first person to be defined as a citizen, the first Aboriginal person in Australia to become a citizen of Australia, which is just a ridiculous concept to get your head around. But the reason that he was admitted as a citizen was that he defined himself as being a really great artist and creating works of art. And if someone can create works of art, at least to the eyes of the Western colonial audience that would judge such things at the time, then they were deemed to be sort of citizen material. So an interesting story, tragic in many ways, but Albert Namatjira's art is certainly something which has come to define the Australian landscape, because he could create paintings like this. It's a watercolour of the Australian landscape, which is sort of has a level of authenticity which is particularly striking. So that's, I think, what we think of when we just imagine art in general. Oh, thank you, Sandy Ma, for that great input. first citizen in Doco in 1989. I should probably watch that. Good thing to watch. Not title landscape. So there you go. There's an art. Go make that in P5. How are we going to do that? Is it possible? Well, it might be possible to make this in P5. I'm not sure that P5 would be exactly the right tool for this job. This is an artwork that's been made with a paintbrush, with watercolors. Watercolors mix in a certain way, and the paintbrush works on the canvas in a certain way, which gives it a distinctive kind of style. And so if you're trying to make things that look like watercolor landscapes in P5 using code, maybe that's not exactly the right tool for the job. So perhaps we have to think about other things that are art in order to look for an answer to this previous question, which was, how can we make art in P5, or an answer that makes sense for this course? So let's think a little bit more broadly about what art is before jumping into some more examples. So maybe the first thing I would do when trying to decide what art is, well, maybe ask myself, have a think about it, and then put it into Google and see what Google gives me back. And one thing you might happen upon if you're doing a bit of research about what art is would be an entry in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy about what is art, definition of art. Because the definition of what art is evolved throughout human history. And I guess this is a list of definitions focused on Western human history. But an early definition of art would come from the great classical philosophers. So Plato had this idea that artistic things are imitations of things in the real world. And I guess when we're thinking about what Plato thought of as art, it was probably not artworks on a wall in a gallery. I'm not sure that galleries really existed in 375 BC in ancient Greece. I'm not sure if things like, if the word art even made sense, and it certainly didn't, right? Art, the definitions between sort of fine arts and crafts, which we now refer to like things that are made particularly beautifully, but they're not an artwork. We have kind of a distinction in modern English, but in ancient Greece, I think what Plato was talking about there would be probably either poetry or music. They were things that are considered to be a certain kind of elevated artistic expression, and other things probably weren't. I think in particular in Plato he was talking about poetry, but art is an imitation of the real world. So you're trying to take something and represent it in a beautiful way, but it's still an imitation. And what does that mean? It's not as good as the real world. So it's a limited form of expressing something. How about a slightly more modern definition? We'll jump forward 2,000 years to Kant, the philosopher. So here's a quote from Kant. Art is a kind of representation that is purposive in itself. So it has a purpose within itself, which is not defined by its ability to represent something else. Well, that's interesting. It's quite a different definition of art, isn't it? Because in Plato's view, an artwork would be only defined by its ability to represent something or copy it. And in Kant's view, it doesn't have to be defined by that. It's something different. Its value is separated from the original thing that it's based on. Still, Kant says it's a kind of representation. So perhaps abstract artworks wouldn't make sense to Kant. Well, let's jump forward another 110, 120 years to Michel Duchamp. We'll talk more about Michel Duchamp next lecture, I think, or next week. But this is not a quotation, it's a false quotation. Art is anything. So perhaps not just representations of things, not even things that are purposive in themselves. Art is anything that you put a label on and call it art. So that's a very general definition of art, isn't it? Perhaps that's somewhat more challenging. Well, what do you think art is? Has anyone got any ideas? I know there's a few people in the chat. I just wonder if you could think about what your personal idea is. What does something have to do to be art? And share it with us. I'm going to jump forward into another slide in a moment, but I'll give you a moment to think. Another definition of art, this one comes from Tony Curran, who is a friend of the course. He wrote this definition last year when he was presenting this lecture. And Tony's view of a definition of what art is would be when something is done so well that it exceeds the function of the thing that it is for. So I guess this definition is similar to Kant's definition in that it owns its own, an artwork owns its own meaning in some sense. It's self-affirming rather than having to rely on the representation of something else. But it's not locked into being a representation. But he has this extra twist to it, which is that art has to be something which is just really, really good in some way. And what is the way in which it's good? Well, Tony's second definition, that an artwork has a surplus or excess of je ne sais quoi. So he's really gotten quite abstract with this definition. Of course, you know, when you have to use French language to describe something, in my view, potentially you're on shaky ground in being able to create a precise definition. Not exactly the kind of thing we are used to in computer science courses, but art is something that has a surplus or excess of je ne sais quoi. I've got an answer in my question, what is art? You tell me in the chat, which is some creative expression that holds some value beyond practicality. So that's an excellent contribution, because that definition of art actually talks about the artist as well as the artwork itself. And I like that definition. I like to include an artist as part of the definition of what an artwork is. So a creative expression suggests that there is a being or an agent or an actor doing the expressing, which is, I think, an interesting idea to start considering. When something is done so well that it exceeds the function of the thing that it is for. So that's similar to what I've just had in the chat, because that one, Tony's definition goes beyond practicality as well. So there's the function of the thing that it's for, that might be the practical value, but there's exceeding that value is what it takes to be artistic. I've got another definition of art here coming in. In order to be art, it should elicit reflection and thought without the limitation of medium. It's a combination of the intention of the artist and what the viewer reframes it to be. Oh, okay, now we're getting to be a little bit postmodern, Sarah. We've not only got a reference to the artist, we've also got a reference to the viewer. Well, that's interesting. So being art involves not just the artist, the actor that creates something, but also the viewer who interprets it, understands it. So eliciting reflection and thought, those are things that only a viewer can do. So this is taking art, we've gone far away from Plato and Kant now, because their conception of art didn't involve the viewer. Or maybe I'm misreading Kant, but we might come back to that when I've brushed up my philosophy a bit further. But we now involve the viewer, their interpretation, and whether or not they can have the ability to reflect on something and think about it outside of the medium itself. Very interesting definitions here. So here's a little thought puzzle. Which of these things is an art? Which is art? There's 3 cups of coffee here on the screen, left and right. Now, in some sense, both of them are beautiful. But one of them is potentially has a bit more excess than the other. And I think that that's the one on the left. The cat jumping into the fish pond from one cup of coffee to the other is a surplus or excess of some meaning and interest of je ne sais quoi, of I know not what. And that's more of an art than the one on the right, which, although it's pretty, is no different than most cups of coffee you see. Well, potentially they both could be art, yeah. That's right, both are, I think someone has said, which is true. The one on the right is beautiful, and you could call that art. Okay, which of these is art? 2 more cups of coffee. One of them is the nice piece of nicely done flat white with a little heart on it. And the other one is something quite strange, isn't it? And I think I would say, well, certainly the one on the left is beautiful, but it's a practical thing. It's a cup of coffee, something in the real world. It's quite normal to see a cup of coffee like that. Whereas the one on the right certainly has an excess of something. It's really going a little bit overboard in terms of changing what a cup and a saucer and a spoon ought to be by adding fur onto it. So it's being very playful with the idea of cup, saucer, and spoon, making something which is clearly related to that initial object, but is now useless, only functions as a work of art. It doesn't have a use anymore. So in my view, definitely one on the right is the artwork. Well, that one on the right, in fact, was an artwork. It's an artwork called Object by Merritt Oppenheim, created in 1936. And the idea is that there's a cup, a saucer, and a spoon. Merritt Oppenheim has put fur onto them and declared them to be an artwork called Object. So now it's an artwork. You put a label on it, we put it in a gallery, it's called Object, it is now art. How do artists name their pieces? Very good question, someone's asked. I think that the name of this one in particular is been chosen to take away its practical use. If it was called cup, saucer, and spoon, it would refer a lot to its practical use. But the fact that it's called Object means that it's being viewed in a different way. It's being viewed not for its practical value or its use. It's being viewed as it's something more fundamental or abstract than that. So this, I guess, is in the realm of kind of assemblage or ready-made artworks related to the Dada movement. So we might talk about that next week, but Object is an interesting way of referring to something that to the untrained eye might be a cup and saucer, but no, it's an object. Je ne sais quoi, I don't know what. That was the the quote from Tony for what is an artwork. It's something that has a surplus of something that you don't know what it is. Well, this certainly has a lot of I don't know what it is. I think a lot of people would agree they don't know what this is, and I think that it certainly has a surplus of it. So that's a bit of a frustrating definition, isn't it? Because we're defining it in terms of an unknown kind of thing. Maybe artworks have an excess of like surprise me in it as a valuable aspect. Someone said in the chat, things that are hard to understand are masterpieces. Yeah, it's a joke. They put a little joking smiley, which is true, but I think it's something to explore. How our lack of understanding elevates something. So potentially things that are masterpieces can be hard to understand, but I think we can also understand in some ways. Sometimes the things that are masterpieces are hard to understand initially, but when you have some experience with them, you see things coming together, aspects of the world coming together in a way which is understandable, but also surprising and before that moment unknown. Quantum mechanics is art. Well, that's another question. So now we'll move away from definitions for a minute because we might be talking ourselves in circles, but keep putting them into the chat. We'll talk a little bit about art and materials. Basically, for the rest of this lecture, I've got a few things to go along with art that help us frame our understanding of it. and might help you to start to frame your first artworks that you're making in P5. Someone says little kids sketching is art. Well, that's true. Little kids sketch in a way that shows their development and their unique way of seeing the world. So it certainly can be art. Art and material. So the material I'm thinking of here is, what is an artwork made of? In this previous case, the artwork was made of a cup, saucer, and a spoon and fur. But what materials do we have for making art in P5? And what materials do we have right now for making art in P5 in week 1 of the course with what you've done? So the one thing which I know you ought to know if you've done Lab 1, is that you know how to make a circle. And hopefully you know how to put that circle on the internet, but that was really the last part of that task. The thing you've tried is how to make a circle. And we did it in the lecture last week. We made some circles with the ellipse function, the ellipse command. We know how to make a circle. Well, surely that's not enough. Surely circles are not enough to make art, you might say. And I might answer, well, look at other artists and see what they have done with circles. And particularly 20th century artists who explored geometry, simple geometries, as a fundamental way of expressing the abstract nature of things, or trying to get inside what scenes look like and the way the world's constructed. So here's an artist called Sonia Delaunay with her work Prismes Électriques from 1914. And Sonia Delaunay was famous for exploring geometries and colour. She was in some ways related to the Cubist movement, but working in a different direction by having more colours involved in her artworks. And this particular artwork is expressing a scene. It's representational of a scene, but it's abstract in terms of using an abstract geometry, the circle, and primary colours to try to explore the fundamental nature of what's going on. And maybe what's going on in this scene are street lights in the electrified city, which would have been changing the way that people see how cities operate. So I can see 2 street lights and maybe 2 people kind of below the street light at the bottom. Yeah, someone's just mentioned the use in crocheting, the craft. You can use simple objects, geometries, to create interesting artworks. So there are certainly a lot of versatility in simple shapes, and you already know how to make them in P5. So this is Prismes Électriques, another more late artwork. Jodie Cunningham, Canberra artist, created this gateway for Woolley Street in Braddon, which also explored circles and geometries in a very interesting way. I'll just zoom in on that one. So this looks more like something that could be created with P5, actually. There's a lot of circles there, simple colors, simple shapes, things that could be made with the simple shapes that you might have explored with already, and you will continue to explore in Lab 2. Some more circles, Jasper Johns, Target with 4 Faces. This is a work that explores circles as well as some other aspects, as well as a human face with these plaster face casts from 1955. Also very simple colours. And Bridget Riley's work. Bridget Riley is an artist who was famous for working with geometric forms, but also famous for working in grayscale or black and white, or very simple colour schemes. So this one called Hesitate is in grayscale. So maybe we don't even need colour to make some interesting art. Another of Bridget Riley's works this is more of a sketch, untitled, but an exploration of placing shapes in space and how different colors and different places kind of affects you as a viewer. And when I look at this, my eyes keep moving around it, trying to find something to lock onto, but I find it quite sort of dazzling the way that the different colors line up. It's very interesting, very simple. So what materials do you have for making art in P5 right now? Maybe you have more than enough to get started with making art. As long as you can create something simple, you could create something which has an excess of je ne sais quoi. Just like Bridget Riley, although we'll talk more about the process of achieving that kind of expression towards the end of the lecture. What materials do we have in P5 right now? I'll just remind you, you have the reference and you have a web editor. You have a lot of ways of creating different shapes, rectangles, circles. I see people jumping in. We've got the fill command, the stroke command for changing color of the outlines of things and the color that fills things. Colors and borders. We can make any color we want and we can add opacity or transparency to these colors. We'll talk more about color next week. So maybe we have a lot of materials. Art and context. So I think we decided before when we were talking about definitions for art that art doesn't just exist by itself as an artwork. Artworks have a context, they have a creator, they have a viewer, they have a place where they're displayed or contained, they have a material in which they're made of. So what is the context for artworks in P5 and what possible context could there be in the world? And that's what I want to talk about now. So here's an artwork. This is called Feelings Are Facts. And this artwork was made by an artist called Olafur Eliasson. This particular artwork was displayed in China at the Ullin Center for Contemporary Art, Beijing. And the idea here is that you would take a big room, a huge room, fill it full of fog, and then use colored lights to illuminate the fog in an interesting way. And then people would go into the room. So I guess the question here is, what is the material of this artwork? Is it just the fog? Is it the lights? Is it the room? Is it the people inside it? Are they part of the artwork as well? Jump into the chat and tell me something. What is a part of this artwork and why? I guess when I think about it, I think, well, yep, the lighting and the colors are certainly, they're pretty clear that those are part of the artwork. Would it still exist as an artwork if there weren't people in it? Because whenever I think about this work, I think about the photos of it that involve humans. And this is quite a evocative photo of this guy on a bike inside. I'm not quite sure how he got a bike inside. I don't know if that was allowed when it was on display. Someone's riding a bike, and then there's these other people in the distance. There's someone in the mid distance, and then some more people in the background fading away. So with this, the people make nice silhouettes, as you've said, someone said, and they certainly make this scene quite interesting in a way that maybe it wouldn't be as interesting if it was just the colors. If we had a photo of the empty room, it wouldn't be as obvious as an artistic experience as having the people in it. So maybe it's what we could term interactive art. Sarah said that it isolates the audience with the fog. That's very true. So if you were experiencing this in this space, you could feel that you were isolated from the gallery and the other audience members. I think that it's certainly interactive because it relies on people being there to look in this certain way. Or maybe it would look like a different artwork. Immersive art, that's a very good way of terming it. That's something we explore a lot with virtual reality or augmented reality as well. The composition, I guess the composition in some sense would be partly due to this photo, which is taken at a certain place. So that would be one interesting aspect of the context. How about another artwork? This artwork is called Somebody, and it's an artwork by Miranda July. And Miranda July has created some custom software for smartphones. The idea of this artwork is that you want to send someone a message, so you have this messaging app called Somebody, and when you send someone a message, instead of sending it directly to them, it sends the message to someone else who has the app, who is near that person, and it says, go tell the person that this message is intended for what that message is. So if you send a message to me, instead of me getting it, it might send it to my office mate in the next office, and they'd have to walk around and say, hey Charles, there's a message for you, and it's this. They have to tell you the message. So it's the artwork is in some sense the software, but it's also a sense in the activity of doing what the software is designed to do. So in this case, what's the context? Well, the real world is where this artwork is made. Its gallery is the real world, and its audience is anyone who's got the app. So it's quite a different kind of artwork than an Albert Namatjira painting hung on a wall in the National Gallery. This one is something that exists in the world, and you never know who is a viewer of this artwork and who is not. Another Bridget Riley piece. This one's about squares, not about circles, so it's obviously completely different. But I think Tony Curran, who put this lecture together originally, commented on this work, and he said it's like your eyes can feel the squares as you look across the artwork. Don't you feel that? It's like it sort of slows you down as you look in there. You can't scan across this artwork without getting slowed down by the small squares in the middle. So Riley has created this way of affecting the viewer physically through a visual field. Someone says that sounds painful. Well, you tell me, you can see it too. But I certainly feel like it's got a sort of texture for your gaze. So artworks, in this case, this artwork involves the viewer in a way that is quite significant. It's not just representing something. It's not just imitating something. It's having an effect on the viewer, which is important. Another artist, Raphael Rosendahl, who could be called a media artist or maybe a net artist, internet artist. I'll just open one of Rosendahl's websites. An interesting thing about Raphael Rosendahl is that their artworks, many of their artworks exist in galleries, like this example, but also there are artworks which are just a website. The website contains the artwork. So here's some website arts, pieces of art from 2019. This one's called somestill.com, and I open it up, it goes to somestill.com, which will have, again, we've got more circles, so circles bouncing around. Where is this artwork taking place? Is it inside the viewer's web browser, or is it in the server that displays it? That's an interesting question. And if no one's watching it, does it still exist? Now, when we look at this artwork, the material of it, the internet, a website, is very similar to the material which we're using in this course. I'm not sure how this was created, but you could imagine creating something like this in P5. It's circles and colors and a background and motion. We'll talk about motion of things in P5 later in the course. Well, let's try another one. I haven't looked at this one, so we'll find out what's happening there. Does this website have an excess of je ne sais quoi? I can't quite know what it is, but it's got a lot of it, so I think potentially it does. Someone says it obviously does exist. Well, I don't know. I think that's a good question. Another kind of art is something which I'm more involved in, is performance art form. I'll just talk a little bit about this performance. This is my iPad ensemble called Ensemble Metatone, and I created a custom iPad app which was a musical instrument and then performed it in a gallery for all these people you can see in the background. Now, the artwork here, I guess you could say part of it was the instrument that I created. Part of it was the musical composition which we were playing. Part of it was the sound that exists within the space at that moment. And part of it just was all of these things together and the people that were there and what they were doing and whether they were paying attention or not. All of those things are part of the artwork in this particular time and place. Sometimes people, I refer to works I did like this as musical performances. Sometimes people create works that involve sound that aren't as much about a performance in the traditional musical sense, and they might term it sound art, a different kind of way of framing artworks that involve sound as a material. But in my case, performances are very reliant on the context, because to have a performance, you tend to have a stage. So I set up in the middle of this gallery some little speakers and a place for me and my colleagues to stand. And we stood in a little semicircle so that you would know we were doing something. And we held our instrument in our hands and we were showing people what we were doing so they could see we were playing music right now. And of course they could hear it. What is not art? In this section of the lecture, you may think I'm going to tell you what art is not, but in fact, maybe I'm going to tell you things that might be not considered to be not art, but actually are in some sense. So if we go back to our original definitions of art, the conception of art by the Dada artists of the early 20th century, for instance, Michel Duchamp, was that anything can be an artwork. So really, there is no point asking what is not art. But I think that sometimes we have things which in general would not be art, but because they've been presented or created in some way that has a surplus of je ne sais quoi, then maybe it does become art. Someone's just suggested that data entry is not art. Well, in general, data entry, yeah, I agree, is not art. But if you enter data with a certain je ne sais quoi, a certain level of excess of something which goes beyond that the trivial day-to-day activity, then maybe it would be art. Someone says, isn't math on occasions considered art? Yeah, people do say that. I tend to disagree. I think that maths and art are different. I'm not sure if I want to go down this road in this particular day, but some things in maths are very beautiful in mathematics, or the structures, the proofs are elegant, the structures are beautiful. The way that the world fits together is very compelling, but I think that it's something different. So am I experiencing connection issue? No, I'm not experiencing connection issue as far as I can tell. It might be having an issue on Microsoft Streams, which unfortunately I don't have any control over that right now. Is art about intention then? Well, Sarah, you said to me that art was about intention, so I believe you. I believe you it's about intention. What is not art? Here's something which people have said is not art in the past. This is a painting called Blue Poles. You can go and see it at the National Gallery of Australia here in Canberra. If you haven't ever seen this artwork and you're in Canberra, I think you should go and see it. It's 5 meters wide. It's a very big painting. And the story of this artwork is that it was created in 1952, purchased by the Australian government, I think in 1973, maybe 1972, and by the Prime Minister at the time was Gough Whitlam. They had a program of trying to build up Australia's collection of artists, of artworks, and having national institutions to house them. Started up a national gallery here in Canberra and purchased some great art from around the world to put in it. And this one, they spent, I think, like $1.5 million at the time, which was a lot of money for an artwork. And it was the most money ever spent for an artwork by an American, by a US artist. And people looked at that and they said, what are you talking about? That's not art, that's a mess. We're not spending $1.2 million, $1.5 million on that. And and it caused quite a controversy because it doesn't look like the Albert Namatjira work that I showed before, something which is representational, traditional Western styles of creating an artwork. This is something which was new, it was abstract, and yet I think that it certainly has a surplus of je ne sais quoi. It certainly expresses something which goes beyond what it is. It doesn't have a practical purpose, but I find it very compelling to look at it. So most people agree now, yes, Blue Poles is art, even though it's abstract, even though it's created by just squirting paint around a huge canvas. Here's another artwork called Thomas by an artist called Robert Mapplethorpe. This is a photo, and it's sort of a kind of classical looking figure. It's representational. It shows a man standing in this tube. And you'd think, well, what is not artistic about that? It's very, very close to like ancient Greek artworks, which are sort of generally agreed to be part of the artistic culture of our Western civilization. But was considered to not be art for a reason which was outside of exactly what's in that, which is that Robert Mapplethorpe was gay and represented a lot of gay culture within his artworks in the 80s, and this was considered to be obscene for that reason. It's not art, it's porn. Well, it's obviously not from our point of view now, but at the time that was a very controversial image to have, considered an obscenity. So that's one way things can be, or artisticness can be taken away from things by considering them to be obscene. I see there's some other good comments. I've just lost the thread of the comments for a while because I was talking, but ooh. Yeah, so someone's commented that if an artist says something is art, then it must be. There's a question about whether others agree. So in this case, Robert Mapplethorpe obviously thought this was art, but others within society called it definitely not art. Here's something. Katamari Damacy is a video game which you may not remember. It's something which was more, I remember more from when I was a student. The idea of Katamari Damacy is that you are playing this little character down here on the left, or the right, sorry. This little green guy, and his role in the universe is to go to a place and roll everything up. So you'd go into a world, and you'd have a certain time limit to go and start rolling things like a big snowball, making a huge pile of everything. It's a very playful and joyful, frivolous kind of game. And it's one of a number of games that is collected by the Museum of Modern Art in New York, in the MoMA collection. So I'll just have a little look there. Whoops, where's the MoMA collection? So this is all of their whole collection, but within this, there are things which are actually video games. There's a video game called Carnival. There's a Minecraft is a video game. Katamari Damacy, EVE Online, The Sims. Myst, that's a very old game now, but also considered to be artistic in some way. So I guess one question which we'll probably explore more in this course as we go along is, are games artworks? Are video games artworks? And I do find that having taught this course, many students create something in P5 which is like a game. It takes the language of a video game and turns it into, presents it in their assignment, and they say, here's my artwork. And sometimes I wonder whether it has je ne sais quoi. If it's a video game where I understand everything already, I already know how to play, it's perhaps not, doesn't have any I know not what in it. It doesn't have a surplus of that. It exists practically to get me to do certain actions. I do them, the game ends, and it doesn't have that extra something which makes something an artwork. Whereas Katamari Damacy definitely did have an extra something. The idea that you were destroying the world and rolling things up and you didn't have really any other point to your existence. You're not executing a story per se. That made it something special as an artwork. So I'm sure you can think of games which are more artistic than others, and potentially we could chat about that in the chat. But Dwarf Fortress, well, I'm not sure if that is an artistic enough game. It certainly is a challenging game. I know people are into that. We can talk about Dwarf Fortress later. What about this? Well, this work called Carnival by Roman Verostko certainly looks like art, but the difference is in how it was created. So Roman Verostko is an algorithmic artist. He creates algorithms that will then draw this. So building a kind of machine, a plotter, which can hold a brush, pen, and a pen, and draw this artwork following an algorithm that might involve some randomness. You might get different ones each time, but generated in essentially drawn out by a computer. Someone keeps hearing the sound of plugging and unplugging USB devices. I don't hear that. I don't have a computer which, there's no possibility of that being in the stream, so I'm not sure why you would be hearing that. So some people might say that the artist's intention is important to an artwork, and I think we've heard that in the chat today. In this case, the artist has created something, and then that thing creates the artwork. So the artwork and the artist are divided, split by another thing in between, which is the algorithm. And you might find that this is the case with your artworks as well in this course, that you create an algorithm which then creates a work of art. Is the code the art, or is the output the painting the art? I'm asking more questions than giving you answers in this lecture, because really what I'm trying to do is not tell you what to do, but to expand your mind to the plethora of amazingly interesting things that you could do which are not making a traditional work of art. Because if you make a traditional work of art with P5, it tends to be maybe too, not the right tool for the job. It's something which the material doesn't lend itself to creating traditional works of art. It does lend itself to creating algorithmic art. It lends itself to creating abstract art. It lends itself to creating interactive art, which we'll talk about another week. But thinking about things which others might consider not art can help us to find what we actually want to do. Finally, art and constraints, my last point for the talk. You might feel at this stage that although you have some things that you can do in P5 to make artworks, we talked about ellipse, rect, and colors, basically. Well, that's not very much. You want to do something bigger. And maybe you hope that over this semester you'll learn enough to make something bigger. And I guess I just want to challenge that concept a little about needing to have a lot of stuff within your artwork to make it art enough. So here's a picture, a painting by Piet Mondrian called Red Tree in 1909. Mondrian was an abstract artist. He was trying to find the true nature of things by taking away details. So painting in only primary colors, simple colors, simple forms, taking away the details of a picture. And in this picture, he's taken away all the colors except for red, yellow, and blue. He's taken away most of the detail of this tree, and the detail of the background's gone. So even though it's representational, it's not true to life. It's missing a lot of details. Here's another Mondrian artwork. Still life with ginger pot, number 1. A picture of a scene from a house. You can see that there's things that look like things, like some glasses, this pot in the middle, maybe some food or something on the table, a book maybe, but it's still quite abstract. The fundamental details start to disappear into this combination of geometric forms and simple colors. That's 1912. Here's another still life with ginger pot, number 2. Even more abstract, even less like the original scene might have been. It still has this pot, it still has some of these items around, but it looks less like a representation of a real thing. 1912, 1915, composition number 10 in black and white. I don't know the background here, but Tony tells me that this is supposed to represent a pier in a river. And so rather than actually showing the pier, Mondrian has just picked up maybe the bits of wood that create it and stick out of the water in different directions, just in up the vertical direction and a horizontal direction, and put them together in this composition. So now it's not a picture of something, it's a composition using these colors. So that was 1909 to 1915 to get to this level of abstraction. So I guess one of the messages here is to be kind to yourself. Mondrian spent 6 years getting to this level, and in this course we have 14 weeks to build you up as a computer artist. And Mondrian over that period was using less and less. Jumping forward 30 years to 1944, composition with yellow, blue, and red. Still the primary colors, the same colors that were used in that first artwork, but now it's a very simplistic abstract scene, a very simplistic composition, much more simplistic than the previous one. Another composition in yellow, blue, and red, also a little bit more complicated, but the same colors. And this one's called Broadway Boogie Woogie, which is actually about streets in New York. And it's more playful than the others in terms of combining these colors in different ways. Sort of elicits a cityscape. So Mondrian was making art better by taking things away. So I guess I'm challenging the idea that in this course you need to add stuff to your artwork to make it an art. What about taking stuff away? I guess in particular I'm thinking about students who will make something that seems like a good idea and then say, oh, I really need something extra. I know, I'll add sound to it, or I'll add some clip art to it, or I'll add a new font. And that maybe doesn't always help to make it more artistic. So there's our question of the day. What makes good art? I think that's called stealing. I'm not sure what someone thinks I'm saying that would be called stealing, but okay. So just like Mondrian, you have to practice, practice, practice. There's two spellings of practice here. Sometimes in English we use one to mean the activity of practicing, like practicing piano, and the other to mean a practice, like a doctor's practice or an artistic practice. So you have to practice your practice to get better. And the concept of this course is that you need to learn the tools and that that's worth the effort. So that's what we do in all of our labs and our first lectures of the week. And then hopefully by refining your practice, you'll be as effortless in creating artworks as Lang Lang in this evocative image of playing the piano. So we're at 1 hour, 10 minutes now, or I'm at 1 hour, 10 minutes. We're at 1:01 p.m. End of the lecture. I'm happy to stay in the chat for a few minutes. We've had some really good discussions about what art is not. I hope I've led you to broaden your view a bit about what art is and what maybe we expect in this course. Of course, I don't expect you to have an artistic practice which you've been developing for 6 or 30 years. I expect something which has been developed over 14 weeks, but I also expect you to take on board the different kinds of aspects of art and interaction which we discuss every Thursday in this course into what you create in the labs and in your assignments. Yeah. So I'll see you folks on Monday with another code lecture. Catch you later.